Hello and welcome to McKinney Vento and Foster Care 101. Let's get to the basics, presented on behalf of NACCE. My name is Kerry, Wrenick. I am the State Coordinator for Homeless Education for the state of Colorado.
Hello, I'm Kristin and I'm the State Coordinator for Foster Care Education, also in Colorado.
We have downloaded this PowerPoint into the go-to training box under materials, so you can find it there. I believe we will also be attaching it as we send out and download this webinar to the NACCE website. You can find it there as well. So for the next hour, here is an overview of our agenda. We're going to give you some pointers for preparing for the year ahead, things you can do. Then we're going to go into McKinney Vento as far as the roles of the liaisons, changes and updates to ESSA, and then resources provided. We'll then move into an overview of foster care, the changes and updates as it relates to that, and then resources for foster care education. We'll wrap up with a crosswalk between McKinney Vento and foster care, and then if you do have questions, you can reach out to us, but we will be conducting a follow-up webinar to answer any questions or specific scenarios to this PowerPoint. So in preparing for the year ahead, just some quick tips and reminders for things that you can do to set the stage and set the tone for the year. Whatever your capacity is within your school district, whether you are the McKinney Vento liaison or you're the foster care education point of contact, revisit your roles and your responsibilities. Look at both the law, what you're mandated to do, but then also some best practices of how you can achieve those requirements. Make sure to introduce yourself or reconnect with school personnel. We understand that there can be a lot of transition and turnover, so if there's new folks in your district, just make sure that you connect with them, introduce yourself, they know who you are, and you know who they are. It might be important to set up some meetings with your district level partners, thinking specifically around Title I, transportation department and director, and then whoever inputs your data for your school district. Those would be just 3 examples of people within your school district that it would be very helpful if you connected with them. So again, they know you and you know them, and just kind of set the flow for how procedures are going to occur the school year in meeting the needs of McKinney Vento and foster care students. Hanging posters both in the schools and in the community is a great way. It is a requirement as a liaison to disseminate information and posters according to the rights of youth. So you can find a free posters brought to you by NCHE, and we do have the link to their website in one of the last slides that you can reference. So you can get those free of charge to hang within your school buildings in multiple languages. Connecting with community partners. They are going to be a critical piece to your work with students and families. Finding out who within the community does what. So if they provide housing, or they are your contact for food assistance. And so just really connecting with critical community partners. They also might be able to provide you with items that your families and students are needing, like school supplies, backpacks, hygiene items. They might have gift cards that they can provide to you in meeting the needs of students as well. So let's dive a little bit into McKinney Vento. It has been reauthorized under Title IX Part A of Every Student Succeeds Act. This is not an in-depth overview of McKinney, rather a surface level introduction. We will be doing a follow-up webinar that digs a little bit deeper into McKinney and some best practices, strategies, and how you can meet the needs and the law as it pertains to your students. So McKinney Vento Homeless Assistance Act, there are a few main themes that we're going to go over. It would be the identification, school stability, school enrollment, support for academic success, and then above all things, that every single decision that you make with regards to the students is that it is child-centered and that it is the best interest of that student. I understand that parents and school administrators sometimes can be difficult to work with and take some convincing, but just understand that our roles within school districts are to make sure that the best interest of the student is always at the center point of every decision. So we're going to be referencing a few pieces in this PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to be citing the actual law and statute as it relates to McKinney Vento. We're going to be referencing the guidance put out by the U.S. Department of Education, and basically it's here's the law and here's how we interpret the law. And then there are going to be some suggestions of best practices on how to effectively implement the laws into practice. So just a quick overview of the educational rights of children and youth living in transition. So every single school district is required and mandated to have a homeless education liaison, and that is across the country. Every single student who has been identified as McKinney Vento and eligible for services has the right to immediate enrollment without delay. They should be attending school as quickly as possible. They do have the right to choose between the neighborhood school or the last school that they enrolled or attended, meaning their school of origin. And if requested by the parent or unaccompanied youth, transportation should be provided to the school of origin. That falls within their rights. Every student identified as McKinney Vento immediately receives free school meals and access to other school resources, and they are automatically eligible to fall under Title I and receive support via Title I funding. So let's look a little bit into what is your role as the McKinney Vento liaison. The new rewrite of ESSA really talks about the capacity of the McKinney Vento liaison, making sure that they are able to carry out their legal responsibilities. And those would include that every student identified as McKinney Vento enroll in and have full and equal opportunity to succeed in school, meaning they can fully participate. The liaison must ensure that all students are identified and that outreach and coordination with other entities and agencies is performed. The liaison must make an every effort to contact community agencies and partner with them. And liaisons are required to put public notice and disseminate information of the rights afforded to students experiencing homelessness. And it says in a manner and form understandable to them, meaning you need to publish it in different languages. And again, those posters with NCHE are in multiple languages. The McKinney Vento liaison must provide professional development and other supports to school personnel. So you really need to get in front of some of those key folks in your district. So I'm thinking registrars, counselors, college and career counselors, administrators, nurses, and let them know, hey, these are the rights afforded to students and we need to work together. There's some pieces in here also that you must provide or should provide professional development around trauma-informed care. Liaisons must ensure that children, youth, and families have access to and receive educational services for which they are eligible. And this goes into preschool, Head Start, Early Intervention, or IDEA Part C. So you are making sure that if you have a child that is early childhood age, that they are informed of and maybe have priority on wait lists if your school district offers preschool programming. And then liaisons must ensure that children, youth, and families receive referrals to healthcare, dental, mental health, substance abuse, housing, and other services. This goes back to the liaison's responsibility of connecting with outside entities. We know that education is just a small fraction of what these students and families need, and liaisons must be networking within their community so that they can offer referrals to families if they need healthcare services, mental health services, housing, and all of those pieces. Liaisons must ensure that disputes are resolved and assistance to access transportation is provided. So if a family wants their child to go to one school and the school district determines that it is not in their best interest to go to that school, then the liaison must facilitate the dispute resolution process on behalf of the family. And while the dispute is being reviewed, the family is entitled, or the student is entitled, to attend the school for which they are requesting. We will take, again, a deeper dive into disputes and dispute resolution in the follow-up webinar, going a little deeper. Unaccompanied youth are enrolled in school, and that procedures are implemented to identify and remove barriers that prevent them from receiving credit for full or partial coursework satisfactorily completed at a prior school. So this really calls out that unaccompanied youth, those that are not living with their legal parent or guardian, must receive some additional support that we are making sure they get a full or partial credit. We know that students who move around frequently, particularly in the high school age, that if they move around frequently and they aren't completing, maybe a quarter credit or however the semesters, trisemesters are broken up in a school district, if they've attended for a couple months and didn't receive any credit for that attendance, there begins to build this feeling of discouragement that, why should I keep going if I'm not getting credit for this work anyways? There are not guidelines or specifics on how this is achieved, but again, we will provide some follow-up to how you can work within your school district to receive full and partial credit for coursework, how you can get creative with that. And then liaisons must participate in professional development and technical assistance as determined appropriate by the state coordinator. So liaisons themselves need to be participating in professional development, learning kind of maybe some new strategies or new laws or regulations, just keeping up with things pertinent to McKinney Vento and homelessness in general. The NACCE conference is an excellent opportunity to do that. This year it is in California, the end of October. So I would encourage you to look into that if professional development is something that you need to achieve. So let's look at determining eligibility. And again, these are just some considerations or thoughts when it comes to determining whether a student is eligible for McKinney Vento. The law can be a bit gray in some areas. So there really is no blanket statement for if a student is considered homeless or not. It is definitely a case-by-case determination. There are always additional nuances to every situation. It is within best practice to get as much information as possible as a liaison, and you having a conversation with that student or family, making sure that you are being sensitive. These families can often be in very tumultuous circumstances, so you're questioning. You just need to make sure that you approach that with some sensitivity and some discretion. They have entrusted in you some very intimate facts and details about their life, and they're trusting that you are using your discretion in who you would divulge that information to. Always refer back to the McKinney Vento definition. Again, There is not a clear and cut, this is it, this is not it. Every situation is case by case. But when in doubt, look back at the McKinney Vento definition to see if they fall within it. Make sure that you have considerations for the family and youth who are staying with other people. So some questions you might ask. Where would you go if you couldn't stay there? What led you to move? Was there some sort of economic situation that prevents you from getting your own place? And then I did include a link to NCHE's Determining Eligibility brief. NCHE has a numerous briefs that are very helpful in my everyday work, and I would encourage you to check those out. There's several different scenarios, but this particular one would be in determining eligibility. So let's look at specific definitions. What does it mean if a student could or should qualify as McKinney Vento? So the overarching question you ask is, does a child lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? So there does give some specific examples of what that could look like. Are they sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing or some economic hardship? Are they able to get their own place, or is there an outstanding utility bill or an eviction or something like that? This is not families who are choosing to live multi-generationally. We respect that, but that these are families that, yes, I want to get my own place and I cannot because of this reason. Children living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds, because they have no alternate accommodation. Living in emergency or transitional shelters, it's temporary. They would qualify as not having a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And then a couple other situations would be families that live in a public or private place not designed for humans to live, or families, children, unaccompanied youth that are living in cars, parks, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations. This can, when you look at substandard housing, this could be a child or family that's living in a house that doesn't have utilities or running water, or they may have an infestation of some sort that is not healthy and could potentially cause health problems. Those are things to consider when you are determining whether a student will qualify as McKinney. And then unaccompanied homeless youth. That would be a child or youth who meets the McKinney Vento definition. So one of those previously mentioned circumstances, they lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, but they are also not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So they must meet both of those to be classified as an unaccompanied homeless youth. So we're going to move to school stability under McKinney. What does this mean? It says that each LEA, local education agency, shall, according to each child or youth's best interest, continue the student's education in the school of origin for the duration of homelessness or until the end of the academic year in which the student becomes permanently housed. So that says a student has the right to continue attending in school of origin that they attended prior to becoming homeless for one academic year. It used to be, the law used to reference that once the student becomes permanently housed, it's within the school district's choice to continue transportation or allow the student to continue in that school. It is now part of statute that says that student has a right to attend school of origin for the entire academic year, even if they become permanently housed. Then, of course, they get reassessed after the school year to see if they still qualify for the next school year. So they have the right to school of origin, or they have the right to school of residency, which means they can enroll in whatever public school that housed students in that same area are eligible to attend. So that's what we reference school of origin versus school of residency. School of origin is the school attended when permanently housed or the school in which last enrolled, including preschool. Preschool is very clear in ESSA reauthorization that students attending preschool have the same rights. So say a student ended last year at school A and they became homeless over the summer. That student has the right to continue attending school A. And they also have the right to follow the feeder pattern. So say they were in 5th grade and they were transitioning to middle school this coming school year and they found themselves homeless over the summer, that student does have the right to continue following the feeder pattern for which they would have been attending. So similar to their peers, if they were transitioning from school A to middle school A, they have the right to attend middle school A. And there is the breakdown of that scenario at the bottom of that slide. In determining best interest, the LEA shall presume that keeping the student in school of origin is always in the student's best interest. And this is kind of going back to one school, one student, 1 year. Remaining in one school promotes the best educational outcomes for that student. Consider the student-centered factors, including the impact of mobility on achievement, education, health, and safety. So what would it look like if a student had to move? Would they be going to familiar territory? Would there be some sort of a disparity in their credits or their educational gap? Specifically for preschools, think about, are there even preschool spots available in their new area for which they are staying? Most preschool spots fill up pretty quickly, and so is keeping that student in their preschool school of origin in their best interest. Always give priority to the parent or unaccompanied youth's request. Help them make that decision in what is in their best interest. Think about travel time. Think about length of time they've been at that school. A lot of considerations and conversation to have with students and parents and guardians. Again, they're not always in kind of that even-keeled mentality, that sometimes it's just helpful to help them process and think through all of the options. If the LEA determines that it's not in the student's best interest to attend the school of origin or the school requested by the parent, guardian, or youth, the LEA must provide written explanation for the reason of its determination in a manner and form understandable to parents. So we kind of referenced this before. It means if the school and the parent disagree, that the school must provide a written explanation for why they've chose for this school to be different. And they have to make sure that the parent understands what's being communicated to them. So do they need to provide it in the language for which the family or the youth speaks? And then they also need to provide them their rights. They have the right to appeal this decision, and then that's what leads to the dispute resolution process. So moving now to transportation. The LEA must provide transportation to and from the school or preschool of origin, including until the end of the year when the student obtains permanent housing, at the parent or guardian's request. So again, if it's determined that a student is going to attend school of origin and they no longer live in the vicinity of that school of origin, the school district is required to provide transportation at the request of the parents or guardian or unaccompanied youth. If staying in the same LEA, that LEA must provide or arrange transportation to the school of origin. And if crossing LEA lines, both the LEA must determine how to divide the responsibility and share the cost equally. So if a student is attending a school in District A and they have found themselves doubled up in District B, but the parents request that the student continue attending school of origin in District A, those two districts must cost share the transportation to make sure that the student is being transported back to school of origin. Let's look at school enrollment. When remaining in the school of origin is not in the student's best interest or what the parent, guardian, youth requests, then that student is entitled to immediate enrollment in any public school that students living in the same attendance area are eligible to attend. So if a student decides, I don't want to attend my school of origin, I would rather attend where I currently reside, then that student has a right to immediately be enrolled, regardless of whether they have the documentation required for all other students. So if it's still determined that they are eligible and they are McKinney Vento, then they have the right to immediately enroll in school, whether they have immunization records, proof of residency, guardianship, transcripts, any of that. They have the right to immediately enroll. And then they have the right to immediately enroll if they've missed the application or enrollment deadlines during any period of homelessness. So say there is a charter school in the area and their deadline for application was June 1st, and the family was homeless during that time, then that school is required to give leniency and allow that student to apply even though they missed that deadline due to homelessness. Now, this does not say if there's no slots available that they have to make room for that student. It just says that they are eligible to apply whether they've missed the enrollment deadline or not. Enrollment is defined as attending class and participating fully in school activities. So it's not just that they have a schedule, it's that they actually are coming to school, they have transportation to get to school, that there are no fees or barriers to them attending educational classes, and that they have the right to be a full participant in the school day. And state education agencies and LEAs must develop, review, and revise policies to remove barriers to the identification, enrollment, and retention of children and youth in homeless situations, including barriers due to outstanding fees or fines or absences. So this just says if there is a class fee associated and the student wants to attend, then the school district must have some policy on how that barrier is removed to allow that student to fully participate. And that could look a variety of different ways, but there must be school district policies that address these barriers. I have said that I would encourage school districts to go back and look at their current board policies. What I've found is that there are a number of districts that have not updated them with the new ESSA reauthorization and language. So you might take this time to go back and review your board policies. Regarding enrollment, if a student does not have immunizations or immunization or other health records or screenings, the liaison must immediately assist in obtaining them. This student must be enrolled in the interim. So if you have a student that arrives at your school district, wants to enroll, there cannot be a delay in enrolling them and letting them participate and attend fully due to a lack of health records. The liaison's responsibility is working with the parents, the family, or the past health clinics to make sure that the most updated immunizations and health records are forwarded to the school district in an expedient fashion. But again, there's no specific timeline for that, but it is the liaison's responsibility to assist in that process. Enrolling schools must obtain school records from the previous school, and the students must be enrolled in school while records are obtained. This can be difficult, especially in high school. seeing what courses they took previously. But if the student even has a grade card or some sort of, maybe not an official record, but they know what classes they were attending, they can help create that schedule that would be complementary to the classes they were before. But you can't use a lack of transcripts or school records to prevent that student from attending school. Again, school stability, school enrollment is all about creating a safe and stable environment for these young people. We want them in school because we know they're going to get the nurturing that they need, the meals, the food, the nutrition that they need, and it's an environment that we can control. So all of these are just to help get the student in that safe and stable environment as soon and as quickly as possible. When it comes to unaccompanied youth, immediate enrollment applies even without parent or guardian. So if a student has identified themselves as unaccompanied, that they do not live with their legal parent or guardian, regardless of the reason that they provide, they do have the right to enroll in school. We do have examples of what's called a caregiver's authorization form, and this is just a document that if the unaccompanied youth was staying with, a friend or a family member, and that person would say, yes, I would contribute and help with their educational decisions, then they can complete that caregiver's authorization form that says they have the right to make educational decisions on the youth's behalf. And that usually assists school districts and gives some reassurance that somebody is helping that student. If there is nobody that can provide this verification or sign this caregiver's authorization form, then the liaison must help unaccompanied youth choose and enroll in the school, giving priority to the youth's wishes. Again, it's as if it was the parent. And if there is a disagreement, that youth does have the right to appeal and to start the dispute resolution process. School personnel must be made aware of the specific needs of runaway and homeless youth. That comes into maybe those professional development opportunities that you can provide, really just offering some understanding and empathy that folks have around unaccompanied youth. It's not an assumption that student just doesn't want to follow the rules or, doesn't like the way that their parents are parenting. There are truly underlining things that we may or may not see at the surface level that have contributed to a child or a young person leaving their house. It has to be pretty significant. So just really offering some understanding when you go out and provide professional development to district administrators, teachers, enrollment staff, that it's not up to them to decide whether a student is unaccompanied or not. It's the liaison who makes that determination. And if you as the liaison have determined that the student is unaccompanied, then that's it. Then the school district must adhere to your decision. Enrolling in preschool, again, all of the provisions are the same, K through 12 and preschool. So they have the right to immediate enrollment. They have the right to school of origin. And if there are not preschool spots available, that you are working with your early childhood, your preschool, your Head Start programming to save some spots in case you do have students that are McKinney Vento. When we're looking at support for academic success, what does full participation look like? It means, again, states must have policies, procedures to eliminate barriers to academic and extracurricular activities. So if they want to attend a career and technical school, that there are no barriers that are preventing them from attending. And again, there's not clear definitions on what that looks like, but that's something within the school. Are there opportunities for fundraisers? Are these sorts of fees able to get waived? So get creative in how you can ensure that these students have access to these additional support, summer school, career technical education, because it really could be the answer to whether they graduate and they have a career or post-secondary options. And if it's something simple like a tuition fee, get creative and make sure that that student has full access. LEAs should anticipate and accommodate the needs of students and consider giving them priority on wait lists. So again, it goes back to if there are, you're going to have a certain number of students next year that qualify, then you're partnering with those programs to make sure that there's spots reserved for students that are McKinney Vento. And then SEAs and LEAs should develop policies to expedite full participation in extracurricular activities, work with athletic associations to adjust policies and facilitate participation. Again, many of us probably were in extracurricular activities when we were in high school, and it could have been a major contributing factor to whether we enjoyed our educational experience or not. The same goes for students experiencing homelessness. They want to participate in sports, if they want to participate in band, they are working with the personnel within your schools to make sure they have full and opportunities to participate. When we're looking at credit accrual and school climate, make sure that students receive appropriate full or partial credit. Again, we kind of referenced this before, but you can consult with a prior school. Instead of making it, they had to attend the entire semester to receive that half a credit, they were there for one quarter. Could they get a quarter credit? Is there a test that they could take to make sure that they've mastered that course? And is there credit recovery available? Again, get creative on how you ensure students can receive full or partial credit for time that they have spent in school and in the classroom. Make sure that you are offering professional development around traumatic impacts of homelessness and trauma-informed support. And then lastly, make sure that if a student that you work with who is McKinney Vento, if there are disciplinary actions being taken against them, that you're able to offer insight to the administrators or the disciplinary action team on, hey, there's some extenuating circumstances around the student, and I feel like their home life or their environment outside of the school has really contributed to their behavior. Let's talk about this. Let's see what else we can do to help support this child rather than disciplining them. So it is the McKinney Vento's liaison's responsibility to assist in intervening and advocating on the student's behalf. As we look to transitioning to higher ed, make sure that the students receive individualized counseling from counselors to prepare and improve their readiness for college, including college selection, application, financial aid, and on-campus support. So this is new and really referencing students, especially in high school, need to know that there are post-secondary options and opportunities available to them. There's many times that I've encountered young people junior, senior year that didn't even know college was achievable or attainable. And so it is the McKinney Vento liaison's responsibility to connect those students to a counselor or to a college and career counselor, whomever assumes that role in your school district. Maybe give them a list of the students that you work with and make sure that there is some outreach and that these kids have knowledge of some post-secondary options, that somebody's helping them complete the FAFSA if college is something that they want to do. And then if you are working with an unaccompanied youth, they must be informed of their independent student status. It's offering them a letter that says, yes, I confirm that they qualify as an independent student under McKinney Vento ESSA statutes. And so then they can take that letter and they can provide it to the financial aid office at their post-secondary school. They need that before the FAFSA can be processed. So you are a vital role in that and providing that documentation to those students. So I'm now going to pass it off to my colleague, Kristin, to cover foster care.
Great. Thank you, Kerry. So I'm going to cover, similar to Kerry, the overview, kind of the 30,000-foot view of foster care under the Every Student Succeeds Act. And, all right, so just a little bit of background into foster care educational stability laws. This is something that came into play on a national level back in 2008 with the passing of the Fostering Connections Act. And that was for the first time there was federal legislation that addressed school stability for young people in foster care and recognizing the need for that school stability. The problem with that law is that it did just include child welfare as far as the formalized, I guess, people that were involved in executing that law. And so there's been a number of things that have happened since, but the biggest one on the national level was the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, and Kerry kind of already went over that part of it. And with that, for the first time, really included educators as a formalized partner with, along with child welfare, to increase school stability for young people that are experiencing out-of-home placement. So some of the key intent behind this law is to ensure school stability, also to minimize disruptions for children in foster care. Something that my counterpart at the Department of Human Services always says, and I think it makes sense, is let's take the emergency out of education. We can't really control what's happening in the home life, and when students are removed, when children are removed from their home, many times it's due to chaotic and disruptive situations that are happening in their lives. And so to the extent that we can minimize those disruptions in the education system, that's going to help out our young people. Also, the intent to have collaboration. Again, this is a formalized partnership between state and local education agencies, as well as between education agencies and child welfare agencies. And then that emphasis on cross-agency collaboration to support students. So defining a student in foster care, and this is just a definition that we use here in Colorado. The American Bar Association also has a number of resources on children and youth in foster care, especially related to ESSA and school stability. So they have a definition there as well. But here in Colorado, how we define students in foster care is that an individual that has experienced an out-of-home placement and has been enrolled in a Colorado public school for the time period and the school year referenced. And then that foster care placement could be brief, it could be a few days, or it could be across multiple years. So this next slide just highlights some national statistics so you can get a view of how many students we are talking about in foster care. Just kind of as a point of reference, here in Colorado, we serve around 22,000 youth in our K-12 education for students that are experiencing homelessness, and about 5,000 for students that are in foster care. So the number is much lower for foster care than it is for our students experiencing homelessness. And as you can see here, the national statistics is around 500,000 students. And so just a take-home message from this, the educational outcomes for children and youth in foster care are dire compared to a lot of other subpopulations of students that are at risk of experiencing poor educational outcomes. And so these educational laws are meant to hopefully increase those statistics over the next couple of years. Something to keep in mind is that this is relatively new for us, whereas McKinney Vento has been around for quite a long time. These laws are really just entering our third full school year in this upcoming year. So the foster provisions under ESSA, a lot of times we hear students that are experiencing homelessness and students in foster care kind of being lumped in together. And we wanted to address that here in this webinar today. And a lot of the reasons why they might be lumped in together is if you look here and you're looking at these provisions that are under ESSA, you'll notice that they're very similar to McKinney Vento provisions. So that same intent around school stability, remaining in the school of origin, school transportation when necessary, and access to free lunch and all of those things are really very, very similar, but these are two very different populations. And the biggest difference being that involvement with a child welfare agency. So in my role as state coordinator here, just especially in this last year, trying to get on the same page and seeing what term in education and that same term in child welfare can have completely different meanings, and even just trying to get these two agencies on the same page can be a challenge. And there's a lot of nuances and specifics in navigating that, which really does take some time and attention and focus to that particular population. And same goes for students that are experiencing homelessness in McKinney Vento. Although these school stability laws are similar and the interventions are similar, there's a lot of different nuances that our professionals, we really want to encourage everyone to understand those differences in order to be able to serve both populations to the best of our ability as educators. So that's a long-winded way of saying these foster care provisions. So again, that right to remain in the school of origin, immediate enrollment, and transfer of school records. The transportation is also a little bit different. While transportation is something that is a consideration that is shared with child welfare, we also have that requirement of having a state point of contact, and ESSA does clearly outline that that has to be a different person from the McKinney Vento state coordinator. Something that we get all the time as a question is, can local education agencies have the same person for their McKinney Vento as they do foster care? That's something that we hear happens in practice a lot, and so we want to be able to support everyone in that, and also to recognize that these really are populations of students that deserve a lot of extra care and support. So if a person has the capacity to be able to fully do both, that's one thing, but so technically, can they be the same person? Yes, but that's something that is not encouraged as a best practice, just to make sure that each population of students are getting what they need. Also, there is a required data collection where there was not before, and it does remove that awaiting foster care placement from the McKinney Vento Act as well. So as I mentioned before, that right to remain in the school of origin, this is something that also can become a little bit sticky with students in out-of-home placement. There are times where students are attending school in a residential child care facility, or sometimes in a youth correctional facility. And so if they're attending school there at the time that they were put into foster care or in their out-of-home placement, that is not necessarily going to be a school of origin if you're looking at staying there. If the circumstances change and that student no longer needs to be in the child care facility or no longer is in the correctional facility, that would not be a viable school of origin. So something that we have worked on in Colorado is defining what that school of origin means, and I would be happy to pass along that definition to any of you if you'd like to contact me at the end of this webinar. Also, in Colorado, this is something that has been clearly defined in terms of best interest determination meetings. So in ESSA, it is assumed that it is in the child's best interest to remain in their school of origin unless it's determined not to be. And so that is a pretty broadly written statement. In Colorado, something that has happened here specifically is our state human services has a set of rules that they have to adhere to by law. And so one of those rules is including that best interest determination meeting, and it clearly outlines that meeting needs to take place prior to a school move. And so it does clearly outline who needs to be involved in those meetings and the types of considerations to be made. That is not something that is as prescriptive written in ESSA. However, there are some guidelines in terms of things to be able to be considered. So things like proximity to schools, really the same types of things that are considered for McKinney, but also adding in that, what are those permanency goals for the student? Are they anticipating being reunited with their family? And for example, maybe they have an hour drive to get to their school of origin, but it's going to be a very temporary situation, so could be worth it to maintain that school stability. But for another student, having an hour-long commute would not make sense. So those types of things are really going to be on a case-by-case basis and taking into consideration a lot of different factors. So some of those other special considerations for students in foster care are the parental rights still intact, and should that parent be included in the educational decisions? Around 90% of the time, those rights are going to be intact. Even though that student may not be residing with their parent, the parent is going to be an educational decision maker and someone who has a voice at the table. Also, students that are on an IEP, this is something nationally that has gained quite a bit of attention, especially for the school move or maintaining the school of origin or where a child attends school. So just as an overview and matter of thumb for students on an IEP, the foster care provisions in ESSA do not supersede any type of laws that are under an individual education plan under IDEA for students. So schools still operate within that IEP. There's still the staffing team. If there's an educational decision that needs to be made based on that student's IEP and their needs, that still happens. So that is something that has been difficult. So it's been a bit of a difficult road. So not an easy answer. We could certainly give a whole other webinar just on that topic, but those two things can and do coexist. Also, students in residential facilities, schools, that is something that I covered before in looking at those special considerations for them maybe not attending their school of origin for a period of time, and is considered in those definitions. Also, the contact information and flow of communication is a big thing for students in foster care. Trying to coordinate between two systems can be a challenge. It is required for every school district, every LEA, to have a point of contact. That same requirement is not true of child welfare agencies. We have seen in our state a number of counties that are starting to have an educational point of contact at the county level, so that schools have just that single point of contact type of model to communicate with, but sometimes that can be a challenge, and so that flow of communication is very, very important. So the immediate enrollment really is the same for students that are in foster care as students that are in McKinney Vento. They are required to be immediately enrolled in a new school if that has been determined to be in their best interest, even if they are missing records. Also, records cannot be withheld due to outstanding fees or fines at previous schools. This is something that is also a Colorado law for all of our students, so that's something that used to be a bit of a challenge, but hasn't been in this last recent year. The next one is transportation, and so in ESSA, as of December 16, 2016, which was exactly a year after ESSA was passed, transportation plans were to be in place between county agencies and school districts, and having a clearly outlined process of how transportation would be provided, arranged, and funded for the duration of time in foster care. And so in our state, we are a local control state with 178 school districts and 64 counties. And our counties and districts are still trying to work that out at the local level. We do have, I would say, most of our largest districts have completed their MOUs, and others are working on that right now. So that's something that has been a work in progress. We do have, as a suggestion for other states, in our consolidated application for federal aid, we do have our districts check and assurance for foster care, that one has them name their point of contact so that that is always up to date, and then also assuring that they have a written plan and operating procedure with their county child welfare agencies. That required data reporting. This is also something that has been a major challenge for states in just the simplicity of trying to navigate data privacy laws for students and also for child welfare agencies, so FERPA and HIPAA, and trying to make sure that that data is being shared in a way that's sensitive to the student. So every state's handling that a little bit differently. In Colorado, we are taking care of the data requirement, the reporting to U.S. Department of Ed through the Colorado Department of Education, through our data sharing agreement that we have with the Colorado Department of Human Services. So here's just a quick overview, crosswalk of McKinney Vento foster care requirements and McKinney Vento, and what is similar and what is different. So one of those things, like I mentioned before, that best interest determination on that first box and that first line up there, that is something for McKinney Vento that is housed within the school district and within the family and the student. So that really is housed in-house. For foster care, that process starts with the child welfare agency because they are the people that are in the know that that child is in and out of home placement. So same term has a totally different meaning for two different populations in terms of process. And again, that intent, though, is really the same to promote school stability whenever possible. So you can take a look here. Both really operate under Title I Part A funds. It's a little bit different for foster care. They can also access Title IV of the Social Security Act. And also both populations, something that we are working with our Office of Federal Programs here, is to consider Title II and Title IV funds to be able to support young people in both populations. Title II is around professional development, and that is something that you can write in as an allowable expense. And then also Title IV to promote safe and healthy schools. So that's some more considerations. And again, it could probably be a whole other webinar of different ways, so contact us if you want more information. There's also non-regulatory guidance on ESSA because these laws are quite broad and not entirely the same as McKinney Vento is. That non-regulatory guidance really does serve as a nice way to look at some case studies and to look at some best practices. So highly recommend looking at that document for support and guidance. This slide is something that is from the American Bar Association on how systems can support education for students in foster care, and really just builds upon some of those things that are in ESSA to make sure that the nuts and bolts are really being addressed in systems. So going above and beyond for foster care, so the McKinney Vento eligible students have a number of rights that students in foster care do not have under ESSA, one of those being the waiver of fees. Colorado has a state law that allows students in foster care to have the same waiving of fees. And so that's something that we've done at the state level to address that. However, regardless of that, students in foster care are categorically eligible for free lunch, which means even if they're eligible for one day, they're eligible for the entire year. So even if they return home to their families, they do get that for their entire school year. That is how that is reported to the federal level. So that's something that is national as well. Also, eligible enrollment for the entire school year. So under ESSA, it really only protects students in foster care for the duration of time in foster care. And so one thing that has happened in Colorado, the state law that was recently passed in the last session, House Bill 181306, does allow that extension through the end of the semester, but it does not go for the whole school year. So if districts can support that, that could make a difference. Also, a clearly outlined dispute resolution process is not formal in ESSA, and that is something just in my role I have realized how important that is. It is highly encouraged and certainly something that needs to be in place to make sure that the best interest of that student is really being reflected in their education. Also, Kerry mentioned the competency-based considerations. That is something that is in House Bill 1306 that was modeled after the Military Education Compact. And so our students that are migrant students, students experiencing homelessness, and foster care students all have a right to have competency-based considerations, or being able to transfer credits and giving partial credits, and really looking at some specific ways to be able to do that. And so we would be happy to answer any questions that you may have on that coming up as well. Also, to provide that post-secondary guidance, including FAFSA and independent student classification, there are some specific scholarships that are available to students in foster care that are not available to students experiencing homelessness. There's quite a few national scholarships. We do have a few state-based and nonprofit-based scholarships here in Colorado as well. So that's something to make sure to understand because students are eligible for things like the Chafee program, for educational training vouchers, and then as well as they provide a documentation if they do have court documents that they were in foster care at any time after age 13, they are automatically independent on the FAFSA, and that documentation is good for 4 years instead of having to renew every year. So quick lesson here as we wrap up, just lessons learned in working with child welfare is, I guess, first and foremost is to have patience in these laws and recognize how new they are in our formal laws and or formal partnerships. My background is in school counseling, and my extent of partnership with child welfare agencies was maybe seeing a child welfare worker on a child abuse case and making reports myself, and that's really where it stopped. And that has really, really expanded with ESSA. So if a take-home message here is to really work and communicate. I have my fourth bullet point here, the secret to success when you have no carrot and you have no stick. This is something, of course, our famous unfunded mandates here with foster care. There is not any funding that is attached to that. So something that has been successful for us here in Colorado has really honestly been passing of state rule for human services around conducting best interest determinations. Since that has been a requirement and caseworkers are now evaluated on that, and they do get monitored and their funding could be impacted if those things don't happen, we have seen a major rise in those meetings happening and happening in a timely way and in a meaningful way. So those regulations are something to consider moving forward and getting the ball rolling on some of these things. Also, having templates. We do have templates that are available on the foster care education webpage. There's some links. The CWEL toolkit is on there, and there's links to several templates for best interest determinations, also an MOU sample, and those were developed by our Colorado Department of Human Services, and they have agreed to share those. They are posted publicly on their website, so if you have any interest in using those templates, you are more than welcome to look at those. Also, to just make sure that you're collaborating against all these systems. Another thing that's been successful for us is building an FAQ database of every time we get a question or a challenging question. I had another one that just came up this morning that I hadn't heard about. So keeping that FAQ database and making that available to others as we navigate through this new time. All right, so this would be our time for Q&A here. As Kerry mentioned, we are going to be having another webinar. So this was really the nuts and bolts and the learning part of that, and we are going to have another webinar to support. So if you'd like to know anything specific from any of these slides, to jot down which one and your questions so that we can have meaningful dialogue and discussion when we come together again.
And then there are just some final, the two final slides would just be some general resources. I referenced the NACCE conference coming up the end of October, but there are numerous other resources on the NACCE webpage. And then we do utilize social media, Facebook and Twitter, to get information out to our membership. And then also an abundance of resources on NCHE, or the National Center on Homeless Education's website. Again, law and briefs and trainings and all of that sort of stuff.
All right, yeah, and then foster care resources. There are several that I mentioned as we've gone about. The American Bar Association Legal Center for Foster Care and Education has fantastic resources. They really have everything from people that are just getting started in this work, and also things for our state that have really been in the nuts and bolts of it for quite some time. So really a lot of great resources for every audience there. And then also that foster care education webpage that I mentioned, if there is anything that you're having trouble accessing or difficulty finding, then I would be more than happy to send anything to you that you were hoping to obtain. And then also several times I've mentioned our House Bill 1306. If you'd like to take a look at that and see how those foster care school stability laws have been enhanced at the state level, that is a link to that bill.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you found this webinar helpful, and best of luck as we enter this new school year. We wish you best of luck.